My family threw a launch party for their new star artist, a supposed AI prodigy named Aora. The problem was, Aora didn't exist. The art was mine. Every last brushstroke, every pixel, every ounce of sleepless, coffee-fueled inspiration. It all came from me. And as I stood there in the back of our own gallery, watching my mother toast to a phantom, a piece of code that was supposedly the future of art, I didn't feel anger. I felt a strange, cold clarity. They hadn't just stolen my work. They had erased me from my own life's masterpiece. So I smiled, slipped away from the crowd, and walked over to Genevieve Croft, the most influential art critic in the city. I didn't tell her the truth. Not yet. I just leaned in and whispered, "It's fascinating, isn't it? For a machine, its digital brushwork has so much human despair." Then I went home and systematically deleted every single one of my creations from their servers. It's funny how a storm builds. It doesn't just appear. It starts with a change in the air, a stillness you can't quite put your finger on. For me, that stillness had been my entire life, living and working within the 4 pristine, white walls of the Vance Gallery. To the outside world, we were a family institution. My mother, Eleanor, was the face, impeccably dressed, armed with a smile that could disarm a hostile government, and a vocabulary of art world platitudes that could make a paint splatter sound like a religious experience. My father, Richard, was the brains, a man who saw art not as an expression, but as an asset class. He spoke in terms of ROIs, market trends, and auction potentials. Then there was my brother, Leo, 2 years my junior, handsome, charming, and utterly useless. He held the title of gallery manager and curator, which was a fancy way of saying he reposted our Instagram photos and took clients out for expensive lunches on the gallery's dime. And then there was me, Maya. I was the engine, the ghost in the machine. I didn't have a title. I was just the artist in residence. A term that sounded prestigious, but in reality meant I was the salaried, in-house forger of whatever style was currently selling. For the past 5 years, since I graduated with a degree in fine arts and digital media, I had been the sole creative force behind everything the Vance Gallery sold. When minimalist line art was in, I churned out hundreds of stark, emotionless figures. When neo-expressionism had a resurgence, my studio became a chaotic mess of vibrant, aggressive canvases. My parents would identify a market gap, and I would fill it. I was a craftsman, a technician, a human art factory. They paid me a stipend, a word that felt deliberately chosen to diminish my role. It was enough to cover my small apartment, rent, and groceries, while they hosted lavish dinners, drove European cars, and took summer trips to the French Riviera to scout for new talent. A cruel irony, given their actual talent was locked in a studio apartment 2 blocks away, surviving on instant noodles and the fumes from her turpentine. The request for this new project had come 3 months prior. My father had called a family meeting at the gallery after hours. The lights were dimmed, casting long shadows from the sculptures, making the space feel more like a mausoleum than a place of creativity. "Maya, we need to talk about the future," Richard had started, pacing in front of a large, empty canvas. "The market is shifting. Physical art is cumbersome. The new money, the tech money, they want digital. NFTs, AI-generated art. It's the new frontier. My mother, ever the smooth diplomat, chimed in. We're not talking about replacing you, darling. We're talking about evolving you. That was the word she always used. Evolve. It meant do what we say. Leo, scrolling through his phone, added without looking up, Yeah, it's sick. People are paying millions for stuff a computer makes. We gotta get in on that. The idea was this. I would create a new body of work. My most complex and emotionally resonant digital paintings to date. But we wouldn't sell them as Maya Vance originals. Instead, they would be used to train a fictional AI. We would build a persona around it, a name, a backstory. We would market it as a breakthrough in creative technology. My father had already picked the name, Eora. He said it sounded ethereal and futuristic. I felt sick. So, you want me to create the art and you're going to pretend a computer did it? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Richard waved a dismissive hand. It's not pretending, Maya. It's marketing. It's a narrative. People don't buy art. They buy a story. And the story of a sensitive genius AI is a hell of a lot more profitable than, well, you know, than me. He didn't have to say it. The unknown, struggling artist who was also their daughter. My mother put her hand on my shoulder. Her touch was light, but it felt like a ton of bricks. Think of it, darling. No more pressure on you. Aura takes the spotlight. You can just create freely in the background. Freely in the dark. Unseen, uncredited, and unheard. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table over and tell them what I thought of their narrative. But I didn't. I had been conditioned for 25 years to be the good daughter, the reliable one, the one who didn't make waves. My compliance was the currency of our family's peace. So, I nodded. And for 3 months, I poured every broken piece of my soul into my work. I created digital landscapes that felt more real than the world outside my window. I painted portraits of faces that existed only in my mind, their eyes filled with a longing I knew all too well. It was the best work I had ever done, because it was fueled by a quiet, simmering rage. I was painting my own invisibility, and I handed it all over to them, like a lamb to the slaughter. The resentment wasn't a new feeling. It was a low, constant hum in the background of my life, like a refrigerator you've learned to tune out. But sometimes the hum would get louder, impossible to ignore. It had been growing steadily over the years, each small slight adding another layer of sound. It was in the way my father would walk through my studio, glance at a piece I'd spent 60 hours on, and say, "Good, we can move this one fast. What's the output on the next one?" Output. Not art. Not creation. Output. Like I was a machine on an assembly line. It was in the way my mother would bring wealthy clients to my apartment, her voice dripping with feigned pride. And this is where the magic happens. Maya is just so dedicated. She never leaves. She made my solitary work sound like a charming eccentricity, not a condition of my employment. I remember one time, about a year ago, I had started a personal project. It was a series of charcoal portraits of the elderly people in my neighborhood. Raw, unflinching, full of wrinkles and stories. It was for me. It had nothing to do with market trends or what was selling. It was the first time in years I had felt that spark, that pure, unadulterated joy of creating for its own sake. Leo had wandered into my studio, holding a matcha latte, and glanced at the portraits tacked to my wall. He wrinkled his nose. A bit grim, isn't it? Who's gonna buy a picture of some old dude's wrinkles? He laughed, but I didn't. A week later, my father saw them. He didn't even comment on the quality. He just said, "Maya, this is a distraction. Your time is a gallery asset. We have 3 commissions for the Abstract Horizons series due by Friday. Let's focus on what pays the bills." He took one of the portraits, a drawing of my elderly neighbor, Mr. Henderson, and turned it around to face the wall. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a slap in the face. My art, my soul, was only valuable when it was their commodity. The financial arrangement was the most insidious part of the humiliation. They called my pay a stipend, and it was just enough to keep me tethered to them. I couldn't afford to save. I couldn't afford to move. I couldn't afford to say no. I was trapped in a gilded cage they had built for me, and they held the only key. Meanwhile, their lives blossomed on the foundation of my work. The gallery was featured in design magazines. My mother was named one of the top 40 under 40 art dealers, despite being 48. My brother drove a brand new car that he'd paid for with the commission from a triptych that had taken me 2 months to paint. I was driving a 15-year-old Honda with a dent in the passenger door. They saw my talent not as a gift, but as a natural resource, like an oil well in the backyard that they were entitled to drill. And my spirit was the collateral damage. I was constantly exhausted, running on a fumes of creative energy that was being siphoned off faster than I could replenish it. I'd try to talk to them about burnout, about needing a break. Eleanor would listen with a patient, sympathetic look on her face and say something like, "I know, darling. True artistry is draining. But think of the platform we're giving you." What platform? I was a ghost. She'd then suggest a yoga class or a green juice, as if my profound creative exhaustion could be cured with a lifestyle fad. My father's response was more direct. "Burnout isn't an option, Maya. We have overheads. We have targets." The Aura project was the culmination of all these tiny paper cuts. It was the ultimate statement of their disregard. They weren't just exploiting my labor anymore. They were trying to automate my soul. They wanted to strip away the one thing that was truly mine, my artistic identity, and replace it with a marketable brand, a piece of soulless fiction. They thought I would just go along with it, as I always had. They thought the hum of my resentment was something I would just continue to tune out. They had miscalculated. They had turned the volume up too high, and for the first time, I was ready to make some noise of my own. The weeks leading up to the launch party were a masterclass in their casual cruelty. They were so consumed by the Aura narrative, they forgot I was even a person. I was just the technician ensuring the product was ready for launch. They'd have meetings about the marketing campaign without me. I'd find printouts of press releases on the gallery printer, filled with fabricated quotes from the Aura development team. They were building a world where I didn't exist, right in front of my eyes. The night of the launch party was the final act. It was the moment all that simmering heat finally reached its boiling point. The Vance Gallery was unrecognizable. They'd rented professional lighting rigs that cast cool blue and purple tones across the walls, making the space feel like the inside of a computer chip. Waitstaff circulated with trays of champagne and ridiculously small appetizers. A DJ was playing ambient electronic music in the corner. It was a spectacle, and every single person there was celebrating a lie I had been forced to create. I arrived alone, wearing a simple black dress. I felt like I was attending a funeral. My funeral. My mother, Eleanor, saw me walk in and glided over, her smile as bright and artificial as the lighting. "Darling, you're here. Isn't it all just breathtaking?" she said, kissing the air beside my cheek. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't thank me for the months of work. She just gestured vaguely at the room. "The turnout is incredible. We have press from 3 different magazines." My father and Leo were holding court near the main display, a massive high-resolution screen where Aura's art was being projected in a slow, mesmerizing loop. My art. My father was laughing, his hand on the shoulder of a man I recognized as a major tech investor. Leo was trying to explain the generative algorithm to a young, attractive journalist, using a string of buzzwords he'd clearly memorized from a brochure. He didn't know the first thing about algorithms. He barely knew how to use Photoshop. I felt a cold wave of nausea. I was an alien at my own party, a ghost haunting the scene of the crime. The main event began around 8 p.m. My mother stepped up to a small podium. The ambient music faded, and a hush fell over the crowd. She was in her element. Her voice was smooth, confident, and full of a passion that was entirely manufactured. "Tonight," she began, "we are not just launching a new collection. We are launching a new conversation. A new artist. An artist who challenges our very perception of creativity, of consciousness, of the soul of art itself." She paused for dramatic effect. "An artist born of light and logic. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Aura." The lights dimmed, and the large screen behind her flickered to life. A slickly produced video began to play. It was full of abstract code, pulsing light, and dramatic voiceover. And then, the art appeared. My digital paintings. My soul laid bare on a 10-foot screen. But my name was nowhere. Instead, at the end of the video, the screen displayed the Aura logo, and underneath it, in small, elegant font, a creation of the Vance Collective. Not Maya Vance, the Vance Collective. They had absorbed me. I was no longer an individual. I was a component of their brand. I looked around the room. People were mesmerized. They were clapping, their faces full of awe. They were buying the story. My father caught my eye from across the room and gave me a subtle nod, a tiny gesture that said, "See? It's working." That was it. That was the moment the hum stopped, and a terrifying silence took its place. The silence of absolute certainty. They didn't see me. They didn't value me. They had rendered me obsolete in my own life. I felt a strange calm wash over me. The hurt was still there, a deep, aching chasm in my chest, but it was now coated in a layer of ice. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to be strategic. I was going to use the same cold, calculating logic they had used against me. My eyes scanned the crowd and landed on her. Genevieve Croft, She was the one critic who mattered. She was old school, a purist. She had a reputation for shredding artists who relied on gimmicks. She was standing near the back, observing everything with a skeptical, intelligent gaze. I knew then what I had to do. This wasn't going to be a loud explosion. It was going to be a quiet, carefully placed demolition charge. My reaction wasn't what they expected. I think they anticipated tears, or a quiet, sullen acceptance. They had certainly never anticipated a fight. For so long, my role in the family dynamic was to be the shock absorber, the one who soaked up all the tension and dysfunction and quietly processed it. When my father made an impossible demand, I absorbed it. When my mother layered on the guilt, I absorbed it. When Leo flaunted the rewards of my labor, I absorbed it. On the night of the Aura launch, as my mother finished her speech to a round of enthusiastic applause, that internal mechanism simply broke. The shock absorber had bottomed out. I watched them for another 10 minutes, my parents and my brother, basking in the glow of their deception. They were a perfect unit of self-congratulation. My father explaining the technical specs of Aura to an investor, my mother charmingly deflecting questions about the AI's personality, Leo taking a selfie with the screen displaying my art. They were so confident, so wrapped up in their own performance, they didn't even notice me moving through the room. I walked with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. I intercepted a waiter and took a glass of champagne. Not to drink, but as a prop. It made me look like I belonged. I approached Genevieve Croft as she was studying one of the smaller, framed digital prints on the wall, a piece I had titled Echoes in the Static in my own files. She didn't look up as I sidled next to her. "Quite the spectacle," I said, keeping my voice light. She made a non-committal sound. "It's certainly a spectacle." "My name is Maya Vance," I said, extending my hand. Her handshake was firm, her eyes analytical. "Eleanor and Richard are my parents." "Ah," she said, her expression unreadable. "The family business." "Something like that," I replied with a small, knowing smile. I let the silence hang for a beat before gesturing with my glass toward the print. "They're pushing the narrative of the flawless machine, the logical creator. It's brilliant marketing." "It's a narrative," she agreed, her eyes still locked on the artwork. This was my moment, the seed of doubt I needed to plant. "But it's funny," I mused, leaning in as if sharing a secret. "Look closely at the layering, the texturing in the background. For a being of pure code, its digital brushwork has so much human despair, don't you think? Almost like it was programmed by someone who was profoundly sad." Genevieve's eyes narrowed slightly. She leaned closer to the print. Her professional curiosity piqued. She hadn't been looking at it as a piece of art. She had been looking at it as a piece of technology. I had just given her a reason to see the ghost in the machine. "An interesting observation," she said slowly, finally looking at me, really looking at me. "The Vance Collective. Is that you as well?" I just smiled. "I just help out in the studio. Make sure the printers are calibrated correctly." I let the lie sit there, a perfect counterpoint to their bigger one. I thanked her for her time and walked away, leaving her staring at the print with a new, critical intensity. I didn't say goodbye to my family. I slipped out a side entrance, the cool night air hitting my face like a splash of cold water. The numbness was wearing off, replaced by a glacial resolve. I walked the 2 blocks to my apartment, not in a haze of anger, but with the focused mind of a general planning a campaign. They had built their empire on my work. It was time to foreclose. My apartment, my sanctuary, was also my digital fortress. For years, I had been meticulous about my file management, a habit born from paranoia and a deep-seated distrust I hadn't fully admitted to myself. Every piece I ever created, every sketch, every draft, every final high-resolution master file was stored on a series of encrypted external hard drives hidden in a fireproof safe in my closet. The gallery's server only ever had copies. They thought they owned the product, but I owned the source code. I sat down at my workstation, the glow of the dual monitors illuminating my face. My hands were steady as I logged into the gallery's remote server. I could see the file structure, the neat folders labeled Ayura/marketing, Ayura/final/prints, client commissions. My entire creative life for the past 5 years, categorized and monetized. My heart wasn't pounding. It was beating with a slow, rhythmic deliberation. I opened my secure cloud storage, a service my family didn't even know I had, and began the transfer. Terabytes of data, the digital soul of their entire business, began migrating from their server to mine. It took 3 hours. 3 hours of watching a progress bar slowly creep across the screen. 3 hours of silence. When the transfer was complete, I took a deep breath. This was the point of no return. I executed the final command. It wasn't a malicious virus that would leave a trail. It was a simple, clean, administrative wipe. A format. I selected the root directory that contained all the art assets and clicked Delete. The system asked for confirmation, a final digital check against a catastrophic mistake. Are you sure you want to permanently erase these files? A small, ironic smile touched my lips. Permanently erased. The perfect metaphor. I typed my administrative password and hit enter. And just like that, 5 years of my work, the entire inventory of the Vance Gallery, vanished from their system. It was all gone. The Aura project, the Abstract Horizon series, the minimalist line art, everything. As a final touch, a calling card, I created a single, new text document on the server's now empty desktop. I named it Assets/Archived. Inside the document, I typed only 3 words. All inquiries, M. Vance. I logged out, shut down my computer, and walked to my closet. I opened the safe and looked at the row of hard drives. My life's work. It was no longer just art. It was leverage. The sun was starting to rise, casting a pale gray light into my apartment. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. The hum was gone. There was only silence, and the quiet, thrilling promise of the storm I had just unleashed. This wasn't an impulsive act of teenage rebellion. This was a calculated response to a lifetime of being minimized. The roots of this go deeper than the Aura project. They stretch all the way back to my first taste of real success and how my family immediately saw it as an opportunity, not for me, but for them. It was the summer after I graduated from college. I was 21, full of a naive, boundless optimism. I had just won the prestigious Thornton Grant for Digital Innovation in Art. It wasn't just an award. It was a career launcher. It came with a $50,000 prize and a fellowship to study for my master's at a renowned art institute in Berlin. Berlin. It was my dream. A chance to be on my own, to develop my own voice, to be surrounded by artists who were pushing boundaries, not just meeting sales quotas. I remember calling my parents from my dorm room, my voice shaking with excitement. They were ecstatic. "That's our girl," my father had shouted into the phone. "We always knew you had it in you." My mother was already planning a celebration. For a brief, shining moment, I felt like they were truly proud of me. That celebration took the form of a dinner at the most expensive restaurant in town. It was just the four of us. Leo, who had just dropped out of business school for the second time, spent the entire dinner complaining about his classes. But my parents were focused on me. Or rather, on my prize money. Halfway through the main course, my father cleared his throat and assumed what I called his boardroom posture. "Maya," he said, "your mother and I have been talking. This Berlin thing, it's a wonderful opportunity, but it's academic. It's not the real world." "The real world is about building something," my mother added, reaching across the table to put her hand on mine. "Something with lasting value. Something for the family." They laid out their vision. They had always dreamed of opening their own gallery, a space to elevate the family name, to become players in the art world. But they were short on capital. The Thornton Grant, my $50,000, was the exact amount they needed to secure a lease on a prime location and cover the initial renovations. "It's an investment, Maya," my father explained, his eyes gleaming with ambition. "You're not just giving us the money. You'll be an equity partner, a co-founder. 25% of the Vance Gallery will be yours. Imagine your own gallery right out of college. A quarter of the business. My name on the door. A chance to build something with my family." It sounded incredible. Berlin felt distant and selfish in comparison. How could I run off to Europe when I had a chance to build a legacy here, with them? They were brilliant salespeople. They sold me a dream, and I bought it completely. I turned down the fellowship. I transferred the entire $50,000 prize into my father's bank account. We signed no contracts. It was a family agreement, sealed with a hug and a champagne toast. "To the Vance Gallery," my father had said, raising his glass. "And to our star artist and partner, Maya." The gallery opened 6 months later. It was beautiful. My name was not on the door. When I asked about it, my mother said it looked cleaner and more professional, with just the family name. Vance Gallery sounded more prestigious than Vance and Daughter Gallery. It made sense at the time. I was put in charge of creating the initial inventory. I worked tirelessly, 12-hour days, filling the white walls with my art. At first it felt exhilarating, but soon the dynamic shifted. I was no longer treated as a partner. I was treated as an employee. The stipend started a few months in. My father said it was more practical for bookkeeping than calculating profit shares on a quarterly basis. He promised we would settle up the equity once the gallery was more established. Settle up never happened. The gallery became more successful than any of us imagined. But My status never changed. I was the workhorse, not the partner. Every time I brought up the original agreement, the 25% equity, they would deflect. The business is still fragile, Maya. We're reinvesting all the profits right now. This isn't the right time to complicate the books. They made me feel like I was being greedy, impatient, and ungrateful for even asking. They had taken my dream, monetized it, and then gaslit me into believing I was lucky to even be a part of it. The Aura project wasn't the first betrayal. It was just the most blatant. It was the moment I finally realized they had no intention of ever seeing me as an equal. I wasn't a partner. I wasn't even the star artist. I was the seed money. And they had been harvesting the profits ever since. Wiping that server wasn't just about the Aura files. It was about reclaiming the $50,000 dream they had stolen from me, with interest. The phone started ringing at 7:15 a.m. the next morning. It was Leo. I ignored it. Then came a text. "Call me. Urgent. Server is down." I smiled and put my phone on silent. 2 minutes later, my father called. I let it go to voicemail. Then my mother. And so the barrage began. A relentless stream of calls and increasingly frantic texts. "Maya, where are you? We can't access anything. This isn't funny. The Harrison Hotel's installation is scheduled for tomorrow. We need the print files. Pick up the phone. Now." I spent the morning in blissful silence, sipping coffee and sketching in my notebook for the first time in months. Just for myself. I felt a sense of peace that was so profound. It was almost dizzying. They showed up at my apartment just after noon. I heard the angry pounding on my door and knew the confrontation was inevitable. I took a deep, steadying breath, opened the door, and found all three of them standing in the hallway. Their faces, a mixture of fury and panic. My father pushed past me into the apartment, his face red. "What did you do?" he barked. No greeting, no preamble. Eleanor followed, her usual polished composure completely gone. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. "Maya, this has gone far enough. You need to fix this." Leo lingered in the doorway, looking more scared than angry. "The tech guy said the drives were professionally wiped. He said nothing is recoverable." I closed the door calmly and leaned against it, crossing my arms. "I didn't do anything," I said, my voice even. "I just archived my work to a secure location, as is my right as the creator." Richard's jaw dropped. "You're right. You're right? We paid you for that work. It's gallery property." "You paid me a stipend," I corrected him. "You paid me a fraction of what those pieces earned. You never paid me for the ownership, for the copyright. I have never signed a work-for-hire agreement in my life. I own every single pixel." This was a truth I had learned from a pro bono art lawyer a year ago, when my suspicions about my family's intentions had first solidified. It was a fact I had kept in my back pocket, a trump card waiting to be played. "This is insane!" Eleanor's voice was rising, cracking with disbelief. "We are your family. We built this gallery for you." "No," I said, my voice hardening. "You built it for yourselves, using my talent and my prize money. The $50,000 I won. The money that was supposed to send me to Berlin. The money that was supposed to buy me 25% equity in this family business. Where is that equity, Dad? Where is the contract? I've been waiting 5 years to see it." Dead silence. My father's face went from red to a pale mottled white. My mother looked at him, then back at me, her mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. They had no answer. They knew I had them. Leo finally spoke, his voice petulant. "So what? You're just going to destroy everything? For what? Because you're jealous of Aura?" I laughed. It was a short, bitter sound. "Jealous of Aura? Leo, I am Aura. I created every single piece you credited to a fictional computer program. You didn't just sideline me. You tried to erase me. You stood on that stage and celebrated a lie because my actual identity wasn't profitable enough for you." I let that sink in. I watched the reality of my words crash over them. "The Harrison Hotel's deal is worth $500,000, my father said, his voice low and dangerous. "If we lose that contract, because you won't release the files, I will sue you for every penny you have." "Go ahead," I said, unflinching. "Try it. Take me to court. The discovery process will be fascinating. We can talk about my undocumented investment. We can talk about the lack of a work-for-hire contract. We can subpoena your financial records and compare them to my stipend payments. And best of all, we can have a digital forensics expert analyze the metadata on my original files, which will prove, conclusively, that every Aura piece was created on my machine, months before you even invented the name." "How do you think that story will play with the art press?" My father stared at me, his chest rising and falling rapidly. He had been a bully in boardrooms his whole life, but he had never been in a fight he couldn't win with money or intimidation. He was powerless, and he knew it. Eleanor, ever the negotiator, changed tactics. Her eyes softened, filling with tears. "Maya, darling," she whispered, "how could you do this to us? To your family? We love you." It was the final desperate move of a master manipulator, and for the first time, it had absolutely no effect on me. "Love?" I replied, my voice cold as ice. "You don't love me. You love what I can do for you. You don't see a daughter. You see an asset. That ends today. The files are mine. They are not for sale, but they are available for license." I walked over to my desk and picked up a piece of paper. "This is a standard artist licensing agreement. It grants the gallery temporary, non-exclusive rights to reproduce the works for the Harrison Hotel installation only. It requires a licensing fee, payable directly to me, and it requires a public addendum to the contract, crediting Maya Vance as the sole artist for all works. The name Aura is to be retired, effective immediately. Sign it, and you get a link to the files. Refuse, and you can explain to your clients why you're in breach of contract." I slid the paper across the table. They stared at it like it was a snake. They had lost. The power dynamic of our entire family, a structure that had been in place for my whole life, had just been demolished in the space of 5 minutes. My father looked at the paper, then at me, his eyes full of a hatred so pure it was almost breathtaking. He snatched the pen, signed his name with a vicious slash of ink, and threw it on the floor. "You will regret this," he snarled. "No," I said, picking up the contract. "I'm just getting started." The immediate aftermath was a deafening silence. I sent them a secure link to a folder containing only the Harrison Hotel files, as promised. The licensing fee, a 5-figure sum I had calculated as a fraction of their deal's profit, appeared in my bank account the next day without comment. For a week, I heard nothing. No angry calls, no manipulative texts. It was an eerie quiet, the kind of stillness that precedes a seismic shift. I knew they were regrouping, trying to figure out their next move now that their primary asset had declared independence. The first tremor came not from my family, but from the press. Genevieve Croft, the critic from the party, published a piece on a major online art journal. The headline was devastating. "The Ghost in the Machine. Has the Vance Gallery's Aura project been an elaborate hoax?" She didn't have definitive proof, but she had suspicion and a mastery of insinuation. She wrote about the curiously human touch in Aura's work, the lack of transparency from the gallery, and the sudden, unexplained addition of an artist named Maya Vance to the Harrison Hotels project. She connected the dots I had laid out for her, and she did it with surgical precision. The article went viral in the art world. The Vance Gallery's carefully constructed narrative crumbled overnight. Their phones must have been ringing off the hook, but not with buyers. It would have been other journalists, competitors, and clients demanding answers. The second tremor came a week later. I received an email with a subject line, "An admirer." It was from Julian Croft, the owner of Croft Modern, one of the most respected contemporary art galleries in the country, and Genevieve's brother. He wrote that he had read his sister's article and, on a hunch, had dug up my submission for the Thornton grant from 5 years ago. He said he had been on the judging panel that year and had championed my work. He remembered the raw talent. He wanted to know if I was currently represented and if I would be willing to meet. A meeting with Croft Modern. It was the kind of opportunity I'd dreamed of in college, the future my parents had convinced me to trade for family equity. I suddenly had options. I was no longer a tethered resource. I was a free agent with a compelling backstory and a portfolio of incredible, now notorious work. My family's attempt to erase me had, ironically, made me one of the most talked about artists in the city. The fallout for them was catastrophic. The Harrison Hotels deal went through, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. Their reputation was in tatters. I heard through the grapevine that 2 other major clients had pulled out of future collaborations, citing concerns about authenticity. My father, a man who lived and died by his reputation, was being publicly humiliated. My mother, the socialite, was suddenly a pariah. I agreed to meet with Julian Croft. I spent a week preparing, not by creating new art, but by creating a business plan. I compiled my real portfolio, registered my own LLC, and consulted with the art lawyer again to draw up contracts that were ironclad. I walked into the meeting at Croft Modern not as a desperate artist, but as a business owner. Julian was the antithesis of my father. He spoke about my art, my vision, my process. He asked me what I wanted to create, not what the market wanted to buy. He offered me a solo show. Not in a year, not when the time was right. In 6 months, with a full marketing budget and complete creative control. He saw me, the real me. I walked out of that meeting into the bright afternoon sun, feeling a sense of vertigo. In the span of 2 weeks, my entire world had been upended and then rebuilt on a foundation of my own making. But this was just the beginning. I knew my family wouldn't go down without a fight. They had lost the battle, but they would not surrender the war. The open-ended question was no longer what they would do to me, but what they would do without me. The gallery was a hollow shell, an inventory-less space with a tarnished name. They had no artist, no product, and no credibility. The consequences of their greed were just beginning to cascade, and I had a front row seat. The silence from their end was no longer just eerie. It felt like the deep, indrawn breath before a final, desperate scream. It's easy to paint this as a revenge story. The wronged daughter rises up, seizes control, and watches her former captors crumble. And there is a certain grim satisfaction in that narrative. I won't deny it. But the deeper I got into my new reality, the more I understood it wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. For years, my identity had been defined by them. I was the Vance's daughter, the gallery's artist, the family's secret weapon. Every brushstroke was a reaction to their needs. Every creative decision filtered through their commercial desires. I hadn't realized how much of my own artistic soul I had lost until I took it back. The most profound lesson wasn't about business or leverage. It was about the insidious nature of obligation when it's disguised as love. My family loved me. I believe that. But their love was conditional. It was contingent on my compliance, on my willingness to put their ambitions before my own. They had created a system where my role was to provide, and their role was to receive. They called it family, but it was a one-way transaction. The moment I stopped fulfilling my function, the system collapsed, and their definition of love was revealed to be hollow. They didn't love Maya, the person. They loved Maya, the asset. The moment the asset became self-aware and walked out of the building, they were left with nothing but the empty space she used to occupy. This journey forced me to draw a line between support and sacrifice. Supporting your family is helping them when they fall. Sacrificing for your family is letting them push you down so they can stand on your back to get a better view. I had been doing the latter for so long, I had forgotten what solid ground felt like. Now, standing on my own 2 feet, I realized that true strength isn't about holding others up. It's about refusing to be held down. It's about recognizing that your talent, your time, and your spirit are not infinite resources for others to plunder. They are yours. You are the sole proprietor of your own soul, and you get to decide who is worthy of an investment and who is a bad debt you need to write off. This wasn't about destroying my family. It was about saving myself. My solo show at Croft Modern, titled The Aura Variations, was the hardest thing I've ever done. It was also the most liberating. I took the original pieces I had created for my family's deceitful project and deconstructed them. I created new works that showed the evolution, the layers, the human hand behind the supposed machine. One piece was a massive video installation that cycled through the thousands of saved versions of a single painting, showing every mistake, every change, every moment of indecision. It was a testament to the messy, imperfect, human process of creation. It was the antithesis of the flawless, sterile aura narrative. The show was a massive critical and commercial success. My family did not attend the opening. I didn't expect them to. But on the final day of the exhibition, as I was doing a last walkthrough before the pieces were taken down, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. It was Leo. He looked different, thinner, tired. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a hesitant uncertainty. He didn't approach me. He just stood there, looking at the art. At my art, truly seeing it for the first time. He spent almost an hour walking through the gallery, reading the descriptions, watching the video installation. Finally, he walked over to me. "I get it now," he said, his voice quiet. "This is what you were trying to protect." He didn't apologize. He didn't make excuses. He just acknowledged the truth. It wasn't everything, but it was something. It was a crack in the wall of their denial. He told me my father had refused to step foot in the gallery, calling it a monument to my betrayal. That my mother had locked herself away, too humiliated to face the world. The Vance Gallery was officially closed. They were financially ruined and socially disgraced. Leo was working as a bartender. He said it was the first real job he'd ever had. "I messed up, Maya," he said before he left. "We all did." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. The war wasn't over, and the wounds were far from healed. But for the first time, a truce felt possible. Not a return to the way things were, but the potential for something new, something honest, built from the wreckage of the old. My life was my own now, my future an unpainted canvas, and I was finally holding the brush. This story, my story, is for anyone who has ever felt their voice being drowned out by the people who are supposed to amplify it. It's for the creators, the givers, the silent engines who make the world turn while others take the credit. Your worth is not determined by your utility to others. It is inherent. It is yours. Reclaiming it might be the hardest thing you ever do, but it will also be the most important. So, I want to ask you, the person watching this right now, have you ever felt invisible in your own life? What was the moment you realized you had to fight to be seen? Share your story in the comments below. Let's talk. Let's create a community of people who refuse to be erased. And if this story resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe. Because sometimes the quietest voices have the most powerful stories to tell. Thank you for listening.